The future is coming, ready or not, and I prefer, and I think most people prefer, that we be ready for it. And that means assuring that we have the people with the skills for the jobs, not just of today, as critical as that is, but of tomorrow, and anticipating that rather than trying to catch up, as we so often do. Industry is evolving rapidly, and we want to be ready for it. And you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to understand that being ready for it means caring about and preparing the workforce.
For a while, we had a really good conversation going in this country about the American workforce, about what works and what doesn't in education. And now, ironically, as we've learned more and more about what really works in education, there's far less discussion on the political level, whether it be executive or legislative branch, about how we make certain that actually happens in our schools. And we see the results of that. We saw some disastrous NAEP results come out recently. And we know that all translates into people not being ready for the workforce. So this is that critical issue that unfortunately we're not talking about anymore. While the right and left are far apart on so many issues, this is one of those, making certain that everyone, regardless of income level, regardless of background, has an equal opportunity to have a shot at a great job. You know, where are you going to find the political difference in that? Now let's go talk about how we do it. And that's why I'm excited about this commission. We're going to talk about how you actually do that.
BPC created the Commission on the American Workforce to bring together stellar leaders from across the continuum, because we know that our economy can't grow, our country can't prosper unless we all come together around the talent pool of our citizens. That's why we're here. We all share a belief that without a high-quality education, you cannot be successful in work, in life, in your community as a citizen. And that's something that we all share, and why we're working so hard on these issues, to bring urgent action around the needs of the American people.
Almost every time you see an analysis of the future of American prosperity, it begins with the realities of having a trained, capable, productive workforce. And that's true not only at the national level, but at cities and counties and states, everybody pulling together to get the maximum we can from the quality of our workforce. This is the main play for our country. And our economy will only suffer, our competitive position will suffer, if we don't work hard to generate the absolute best workforce that we can.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Cheryl Oldham, Executive Vice President for BPC's Human Capital Program, and welcome to the 6th event in our America's Workforce series. Today, we're focusing on the impact of AI on education and workforce. Certainly a hot topic, one well covered. Lots of concerns out there. Some misinformation. And so today we'll unpack some of the misconceptions and explore how skills change brought on by AI is impacting learners and workers. And we're so fortunate to have some of the smartest people I know in the space. Today we're going to talk with Rosemary Lahaski, the Vice President of U.S. Government Relations for Pearson, Josh Connolly, Senior Manager of U.S. Policy and Economic Graph at LinkedIn, Justin Ladner, Senior Labor Economist with SHRM. And moderating the conversation today is my colleague, John Fogarty, Associate Director of Tech Policy here at BPC. John, thanks so much for leading today's discussion, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. And thank you, Cheryl. So we received a lot of audience questions, and we want to maximize our time with our speakers today. So we've tried to incorporate some of those questions throughout the program discussion. And with that, I'd love to jump right in. So as Cheryl mentioned, setting aside some of the hype and misconceptions today around what AI is or it isn't, it's very clear that artificial intelligence is already shaping both our education systems and our broader economy. These changes will influence generations to come because AI simply isn't going to be going anywhere. But before we dig in to what's next, let's set the stage on what we're actually seeing today in both the classrooms, the workplaces, and everywhere else across the country. And I'd like to start with you, Josh. So based on LinkedIn's data, what does AI adoption actually look like across sectors? Are there emerging patterns in who's adopting AI? And how does that adoption change the way people are teaching, learning, and working today?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks to the BPC for having me and for everybody joining us today. So real quickly, to level set, LinkedIn has almost 3 billion people on platform, 69 million businesses, 140,000 schools, and 41,000 unique skills that people can self-identify as having. So we use this unique platform and perspective to look really deeply at things that we see impacting the world of work. And key to that right now is AI and the impact of work and the future of work. So we just did a report. We looked at the US, UK, Germany, France, and India to look at AI adoption. The big headline was that AI adoption and generative AI adoption could unlock $6.6 trillion in added productivity. The other headline is that 4.1 trillion of that could be realized in the US. So we saw that roughly half of the businesses, small, medium, and large in the US, have adopted AI in some form or fashion. But your question of uptake, it's kind of a squishy um, term at this point of how folks are utilizing it, how companies are utilizing it. So to realize that real full potential, we're not only going to need companies that aren't adopting AI practices now to do so, but also more deeper integration and utilization of generative AI tools in appropriate ways within companies that already are. One last thing, the extra time folks have in the tool of generative AI and tools enabled by generative AI most commonly is used for creative purposes, which kind of surprised me. I thought it was going to be automation or kind of duplicative tasks were going to be the key utilizer there. But it's actually 70% of respondents actually said it's for creativity. So not as intuitive as I thought.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And I'd like to ask you a question, Rosemary. Since you've spent a lot of time working at the intersections of education, courseware, and skills, how is the Department of Education approaching AI integration in the classroom today? And are there any federal guidelines or grant programs under development that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there's so much I think that gets focused on at the Department of Education around the dismantling and moving things back down to the states, which rightfully so. But there's actually a lot of other things that are happening too. They've made it a priority at the department for their competitive grant programs to really focus on integrating AI tools and services into the K-12 classroom. And so we're seeing a lot of that start to happen through some of their competitive grants that they're running, whether it be out of the Department of Ed or the Department of Labor, wherever it ends up being housed. Some other things that I think that are happening across the government, the administration has put forward an AI action plan, which has created an AI task force, which is really one of the biggest pillars around that is around education and trying to have a whole of government approach to some of this stuff. They've called on the private sector to start to implement and provide resources to K-12 schools so that American students are really at the forefront of learning these new things. So at Pearson, for instance, we've been a proud supporter of the AI pledge to America's students. We're providing over 250,000 vouchers to high school teachers to make sure that they are prepared on generative AI platforms and credentials, providing them not only the training, but also the credentials so that they're teaching it to their students. And finally, the Department of Labor, along with the White House, has put out a workforce action plan, like a talent strategy, where they're really focusing a lot around AI, incorporated into apprenticeships, incorporated into reskilling, rapid reskilling initiatives. And I think we'll start to see some of that really play out now that the government shutdown is over.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosemary. And now, Justin, I want to turn over to you and talk about the workplace. So looking at what we know today in your research at SHRM, where is AI already showing up in the workplace in terms of tasks or workflows? And to what extent is AI automating tasks versus transforming how work gets done?
Thank you so much for the question, John, and thank you to everybody. It's a pleasure to join the conversation today. So earlier this year, we at SHRM conducted a large-scale survey of American workers with the goal of estimating the extent to which different occupations where the tasks in different occupations were completed using an automation technology or using generative AI in particular. And the general finding that we have with respect to generative AI is that there are certain types of occupations where it's the proliferation of those technologies is quite extensive. Computer and mathematical occupations really stand out as being especially prone to high AI usage, as you'd expect. So computer programmers, for example, software developers, IT types of occupations. A lot of AI tools are designed to operate in that environment, and they work very well in that environment, and they're highly used in those environments. So those are some of the most exposed occupations in terms of having a high fraction of tasks that are done using AI tools. But there's a lot of other occupations as well. So a lot of white collar occupations in general that historically have not really been exposed to any automation or automation adjacent type of technology are increasingly being exposed to automation in general and then generative AI in particular. Examples would include a lot of business and financial operations occupations, so claims adjusting, a lot of accounting work, a lot of kind of general office work that involves some tasks that are fairly rote and can be automated through either a general automation tool or generative AI in particular. So those are kind of our general findings. Now, what we also find with respect to sort of displacement versus transformation, our general finding is that we have a lot of jobs that are more transformed by AI or transformed by automation technology. So we don't have very many jobs, obviously, where all of the tasks are done using automation or generative AI in particular. But we do have jobs where there are a lot of tasks done. So it transforms the nature of the work. We also find in our research that even in jobs that are highly automated or highly done using generative AI, our survey respondents anyway claim that there are often non-technical reasons that their job couldn't be displaced by an automation technology, even if the technology could perfectly replace them. And a lot of reasons for that, you'd naturally expect things like client preferences for interacting with humans, or legal and regulatory barriers, or just cost effectiveness. Those all stand out as reasons that kind of make the human part of a job still very much irreplaceable by these technologies.
Great. And thank you so much for that answer. And I have a follow-up question. This can be open to everyone as well, but what types of work are being impacted, and where are we more likely to see AI be a complement to workers rather than outright replacing? And that could be collaborative robotics or some of the examples that you've just shared.
So just to build on off what I said, I would say that the vast majority of employment is in that category of being not the vast majority of employment, but there are many occupational groups, many industries where AI has proliferated as a valuable complement to completing work. So not entirely displacing a particular job or a particular occupation, but sort of transforming the nature of that work. Now, displacement, I mean, I'm sure everyone has seen headlines. There are, layoffs that are at least being claimed to being associated with adoption of AI and displacing workers that way. The headlines that you might have seen relate to displacing workers, especially in sort of customer service roles or HR roles. I believe I recall a headline from earlier in the year where IBM was reduced their HR workforce by a couple hundred people in response to adoption of AI technology. So there are definitely those cases where you actually see this displacement occurring. But what seems to be the case, at least in our research, is that transformation of work across a wide variety of roles, particularly in white-collar occupations, seems to be the more prevalent trend.
Yeah, and to build off what Justin said, so we've looked at what positions are more inherently augmentable or insulated or disrupted. So for instance, with potential disrupted jobs, librarian, translator, administrative assistant is more of those tasks that not can be potentially automated, but the prevailing majority of jobs that we've looked at in roles are either insulated or augmented. Veterinarian technician, pharmacy technician, emergency dispatcher, folks like that, those sorts of roles are kind of inherently insulated. But then a huge chunk of jobs are going to be augmented. So that's just going to mean that folks are still going to be doing those jobs, and it's just going to be using different skills along with AI skills to do them.
Got it. Great. And thank you both. That really helps set the stage in terms of what we're seeing in terms of use cases, trends. And now I'd like to talk about the next topic, which is skills. So obviously, education and the workforce are deeply connected. You really can't talk about one without the other. The skills that are taught in classrooms and training programs today directly shape the success of individuals in the labor market tomorrow. So Justin, I have a question. Skills have been evolving for years, even before AI entered the picture. What's been driving that pre-existing evolution or trends around skills? And has AI just simply accelerated the pace of change today?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, speaking just broadly about that topic of sort of skills evolving, I mean, they've always been evolving, right? As far back as we have recorded history, we have skills evolving and changing over time, and that all relates to technological change. Technology advances and it changes the nature in which different tasks are completed, and that's really the kind of driver of changing skills over time. Now, in terms of the sort of rate of change, this is actually a really interesting area of research. And there's some disagreement. It sort of depends on what you're trying to measure. But I would say that certainly there's pretty broad agreement that in the last several decades, technological change, especially in this sort of space, in sort of computer technology, AI, software tools, the extent of the types of work they can do has really accelerated, and it's changing at a very, very, very rapid pace. The other thing that's really interesting is that it's certainly clear that technological diffusion has changed over time. So once a technology comes to be, it's diffusing much more rapidly. So if you go back, hundreds of years, and technology might come to pass, it might come into existence, but it takes a long time to diffuse. Even something like electricity, it was invented or became a thing that was available in the late 19th century, but didn't really diffuse until the mid 20th century. It widely spread. We're finding increasingly that once technologies are available, once there's a use case for them that's identified, they're diffusing fairly rapidly. So something like ChatGPT or a generative AI tool that literally didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago has now diffused and become a large part of a lot of occupations around the world. And so that's, I think, the rate of change. Those are two things I'd highlight, is that certainly this type of technology seems to be evolving very, very rapidly, and it's also diffused extremely rapidly. And so that means that the pace of change therefore becomes very rapid and also pretty unpredictable in terms of how this will evolve. So it makes prediction in the future difficult.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. And I'd like to turn over to Rosemary, given your extensive background in education. So in your work leading the Skills First initiative, are we seeing AI reshape how students are learning today, not just what they are learning? And on top of that, what does that mean for addressing certain concerns of learning loss or academic preparedness?
I think, John, honestly, I think the answer is we maybe I start with what would we like to see? And I know like at Pearson, we're really interested in sort of embedding some of these tools into the classroom. So we're rethinking a new generation of learning ecosystem that starts to take place, where you're looking at real-time feedback a student gets. You're looking at personalized pathways they can take on their educational journey. You're looking at competency-based approaches to education. So, sort of looking at how they're learning and growing upon that. I think what we're actually seeing in the classroom today is probably more like AI tutoring tools and bots. It's not bad, but I don't think we're exactly where we want to head. My biggest fear, I think, with this idea around learning loss is what happened in COVID, where everything immediately went online. And we really didn't know what students were learning and not learning, right? I think the question we have with what's happening with AI today is, in some cases, there's a lot of fear in the classroom that these tools are being used and you don't really know how to measure what a student knows and doesn't know. And we learned a lot of things from COVID, which is you have to measure. We have to measure, and we have to measure the right way. So there's innovations, I think, when it comes to assessments, the thought of really looking in real time at how somebody is learning and measuring that to make sure that we're not going to go through the learning loss that I think we experienced in COVID. So there's a lot of innovation happening. There's a lot of fear that's also happening in real time. And I think trying to take a look at that and figure out how do we sort of take some lessons I think we learned over the past 5 years and make sure we don't repeat some of those mistakes.
Great. Thank you, Rosemary. On that, I would like to ask a question of you, Josh. So from LinkedIn's economic graph, what changes have you observed in terms of skill demand before and after the rise of AI?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot. So from 2015 to now, the skills needed to do jobs on platform have changed 25%, which seems like a big number. We're predicting that by 2030, that number is going to be 70%. So 70% of the skills, everyday skills people use and bring to work, are going to be different than what they are now. So what that means is that degrees and job titles are going to become increasingly less useful proxies for the skills needed to do jobs. So really zooming in on below the title, below the degree that folks have, but the actual skills folks have to do the jobs they're doing. And mapping those skills out is going to be increasingly important to finding the right fits and identifying the opportunities for folks to upskill and reskill to do their current jobs better, but also to get other opportunities out there.
Great. So follow up on that, for yourself or anyone else, do you think we have the right systems and infrastructure in place today to keep pace with this change now and in the future? And relatedly, are there any skills you think that AI can't duplicate? I know we talk about, AI not being able to replace creativity or context, but interested in what you've seen or are thinking.
So the first question, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of room for improvement. We need in real time a real granular understanding of the skills in demand, what skills folks have, and a clear taxonomy of the workforce and what's needed. That's going to be huge. And then are there skills that AI is not going to be able to duplicate or replace? 100%. There's tons. Those we refer to as human-centric or durable skills and foundational skills that really are going to be increasingly important. Creativity being one, collaboration, being able to present ideas, and work with others. There's countless, and they're going to be increasingly important.
Perfect. And before we
Just
turn
to,
to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Just to build off Josh's point, so I mentioned that a lot of the work that we've done this year is focused on the degree to which non-technical barriers to displacement play a role in protecting jobs or insulating jobs from being automated fully. The things that we found are broadly aligned with a lot of what Josh mentioned. So just for an example, we find that jobs like healthcare type jobs that in principle have some opportunity for a high degree of automation or high degree of AI use. There's still such a human component to a lot of those jobs that probably insulates them, at least in the very near term, from being fully displaced. So the idea that a patient wants to talk to a doctor or they want to have human interaction with a healthcare provider probably plays a really critical role in those jobs. And there's other jobs that are actually we know to be basically fully automatable that we still have as being uniquely or sort of clearly human roles, certainly now and perhaps long into the future. I think the most obvious example would be an airline pilot, right? So we all kind of know that in principle, when you fly when you take a commercial flight somewhere, 95% of that flight is pretty much automated. The plane can more or less fly itself. There's not a whole lot of direct interaction by the pilot or the co-pilot during the flight. Most of it's automated. But would you get on a plane if you knew that there wasn't a human pilot on board? So there's that aspect. There's a legal issue there. It's not legal to have a plane that's totally automated that has no pilot on it. And there's also sort of a client preferences. Would customers actually be willing to accept that? Now, one thing is that a lot of these things evolve rapidly over time. Laws can change, regulations can change, consumer preferences can change. But it's something that in the near term, those types of issues play a large role in determining whether or not automation actually occurs.
Great. Thank you so much. I think a big part of this, in terms of any education, is about building that trust and assurance, especially when it comes to, emerging technologies. And on that, I want to talk about AI literacy before we return to foundation skills. On AI literacy, what does that mean in practice for educators, students, employers, or workers?
I guess I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think it's another term that could use some refining, but it's being conversant with and able to utilize and optimize um, generative AI tools at one's disposal. So, I mean, the two buckets, large buckets of AI tools are AI technical skills and AI literacy skills. So, being able to be presented with something that can help personally or professionally, and understanding the context, understanding how to appropriately use it, um, and how to make it net beneficial for you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that highlights two of the, aspects of AI literacy for me. I think it's one, understanding what value is on the table that's newly created for various individuals or organizations or society to tap into, but also being smart consumers of that technology and knowing when it fits your needs.
Absolutely.
And so with that, let's talk about foundational skills for a moment. So Rosemary, I know, reading, writing, critical thinking, and problem solving are all essential foundational skills. But why are they more important today in the age of AI?
I think because things are just changing so rapidly. I mean, way faster than we ever thought. So this idea that you have to learn how to learn is probably the most important thing I think we can be teaching people. How to think critically, how to problem solve. Some of what Josh was talking about around these durability skills, right? Oftentimes that gets lost and it's hard to teach. But those are probably the most important things we could be teaching, because I think as technology and automation and all of these new things are sort of happening in real time, the ability to adapt to them and to learn how to use them is almost more important than learning, the latest technical sort of skill. And so that's what we've been really, really thinking through, I think, at Pearson, and thinking larger through the Skills First Coalition and others. How do we start to really teach that?
And I would add on to that, yeah, I mean, the way we envision utilization of these tools is not to put them on cruise control and just let them spit out whatever they want and copy and paste it. It's really those foundational skills that serve as a check on what generative AI output is, and provides guardrails to make sure that what you're putting out there makes sense and is accurate. And again, it's how do you optimize that dynamic as kind of a co-pilot rather than just something on cruise control you're just letting do tasks on their own.
Yeah.
And also providing parameters and specific input into these tools refines and makes what they provide much more useful.
That's great. And on that, interested if you have thoughts on how do we validate those foundational skills and continue to build resiliency around them for individuals?
You want me to go? I think it's something we're constantly rethinking on how to do. This idea of how do we know somebody actually knows what they know? How do we know they have the talent and the skills that they say they do? We've invested a ton of time and effort into looking at skill sets. Do they match job postings? Can we validate them? Are they employer approved and validated? So these things are incredibly important, I think, as we're starting to move forward, especially in the age of skills-based hiring and skills-based training. There's a question around the value of higher education. The way most people sort of validate their skills today is to say, oh, I have a college degree, or, I have this sort of certification. And that does make a lot of sense, but I think as we're moving forward and the way things are moving so fast, we've got to really sort of drill down to the actual skill set. And so that's a big focus that we've been having around how do we hire and train people based on skills? How are these skills sort of the new currency when in the job market?
Thank you. And so, Justin, I had a question for you. Will this shift in foundational skills affect the workplace and employer expectations? Are we observing that today, or can we expect that in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that fundamentally, probably the biggest shift that's already happened is just these tools have introduced an opportunity to transform work that previously had never been associated with automation. So generative AI tools, they just fundamentally do different things that even a few years ago people would not have assumed. They would have thought of them as being purely human tasks. So writing and composition, for example, or a lot of critical thinking, those kinds of things would have kind of never been really associated with an automation type tool, an automation adjacent tool. So I think that's the biggest shift, is just the idea that these foundational skills would be in any way related to these types of technologies. I think that's one of the biggest shifts. But I also think this kind of goes back to the sort of importance of AI literacy, particularly relating to understanding the limitations of these tools. And I think we're actually seeing that play out in real time, where there's a huge wave of enthusiasm for what these tools can provide in terms of increasing productivity, in terms of increasing output, in terms of improving product quality. So there's a huge wave of enthusiasm for that, but there's also this kind of I don't know how to describe it exactly, but basically a growing recognition that there are limitations that need to be addressed, and there needs to be an understanding about how these tools need to interact with humans functionally. So there are things like prompt engineering, for example, like how do we actually the growing recognition that there's a very important role to play to be able to prompt an AI tool appropriately to get the response that you want, to prevent a kind of bad output that can lead to a bad outcome. So I think all of those things are influencing both worker expectations and employer expectations in this area. I imagine that as the future, as things unfold, the relationship between foundational skills and AI, and how AI influences the development and sort of the way in which foundational skills are incorporated into work will sort of continue to evolve. But at the moment, I think the most fundamental thing is just understanding the sort of the relationship between how these tools are getting incorporated into work, what the limitations are, and how they can be combined in a way that produces better outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Justin. So, closing out this discussion on skills, how do we prepare post-secondary institutions and workplaces around shifting foundational skill needs? And we could be you, your organization, or, collectively, are there policy levers, new tools, or whatever else that could close some of these gaps? Rosemary, did you have any thoughts?
I guess I'm probably best prepared to talk about it from a policy perspective. What is happening today when it comes to some of these issues, and is the federal government in particular helping people prepare for the onslaught of rapid reskilling? There's been a couple of things that they've moved forward on or come close to the finish line on. We have something called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It really is sort of the nation's job training system. It's not quite prepared, I think, for helping most of the country to reskill and upskill. And so we came close to getting that passed last Congress. But even if we were to get it across the line, I'm not sure it is the answer to what is happening. The second thing that Congress did this past summer was, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, they were able to pass something called Workforce Pell, which really expanded the Pell Grant, which helps low-income students access post-secondary education. And they expanded it beyond just 2- and 4-year degrees, but actually workforce training programs. So students can now actually access some of these grant dollars to help them with shorter duration training programs that may really be helpful, I think, in the age of AI. But I think ultimately, honestly, we have got to have a comprehensive strategy where education, policymakers, and industry are really thinking collectively together in some sort of public-private partnership, really around rapid reskilling in this country, and how we are going to get most people up to speed, and then the constant need to retrain and reskill as things are so happening so fast. So that's sort of my call to action that I hope happens, and that I know a lot of us here are working together to try and move that forward.
On the business side, I guess I would just add that businesses need to drill down below the job title to really get clear on what skills are needed for that job and how those skills are changing, and then to be flexible and adaptive and be willing to invest in upskilling and reskilling those folks to optimize their performance and to make them successful in those roles, which is good for the employees and the business ultimately.
Just to echo what Rosemary said, or what Rosemary and Josh have said, I mean, the first things that come to mind for me are skills-based hiring and the kind of need to have very fluid, very adaptable reskilling and upskilling programs. And again, I think that's a partnership between educational institutions, employers, and government agencies. It's a complicated problem to solve. I think one of the first things that has to happen, obviously, is just changing attitude about what the nature of one's career looks like. I mean, the kind of fundamental traditional view of you when you're young, you're educated, you learn a skill, and then that skill becomes your career. I think we're increasingly seeing that that's really not going to fit the mold for quite a few people going forward. That there has to be sort of a constant evolution during one's career, and that their career may in fact that span very different types of jobs and evolve very rapidly over time. So having a system in place that allows people to do that, I think, is important. I think another critical idea to solve, and this is potentially at a national level, so at sort of a government level, but also certainly in an employer context, understanding occupational mobility. So if I have technological change that suddenly requires certain jobs to become more prevalent, others to become less prevalent, how do I identify workers that could be most easily trained to move into new roles? How can I kind of make those transitions as efficient as possible? And I think understanding the occupational mobility between different occupations is a really clear and important part of that process.
Great. And thank you all for answering that question. It tees us up also for our next discussion topic, which is policy. So we've seen a wave of state action and more recently some federal attention on AI. So while a patchwork of state laws can create some difficulties, there's also an edge in serving as case studies for innovation. So when I'm thinking case studies for innovation, I'm thinking about how early state laws might create real-world experiments that test new regulatory ideas, reveal practical impacts, and generate lessons that might inform smarter or more scalable federal or cross-state approaches. So this is a question to everyone. Are there particular states or programs right now that stand out as promising models or case studies? Josh, are you familiar with any that come to mind?
Sure. I mean, the Alabama Talent Triad is kind of touted as a model of bringing employers together with workers and mapping out skills and kind of a one-stop shop platform. I'd say if you kind of poke through the data, there's some room for improvement here. I think it's early days. I mean, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. The questions are kind of things on the table are learning and employment records. How do you scale those? I mean, because of the mobility of the workforce that we see on LinkedIn, people coming and going places for various job opportunities, you really need a national system and a scalable system to meet some of these challenges, again, like LERs. So yeah, I mean, I think LinkedIn's very supportive of creative, outside the box approaches to a lot of these challenges. And again, getting back to what Rosemary and Justin said, like the speed and cadence of all of this change is going to require a lot of flexibility and adaptability and built into the systems to address these challenges. That's going to be foundational and critical.
Yeah, I think I would just add to it too, I think the things that we all know work the best is when employers are involved. when they're helping to design the curriculum alongside an education provider, when they're helping to provide the latest technology that an equipment someone will use. So those, we know that those are sort of the best models, these ideas around work-based learning, somebody's learning on the job. We see it in some cases around registered apprenticeship programs. We see it in more informal circumstances. And so I think those are the kinds of things we want to see taken to scale. But I think the issue for us is that it's just not, is that feedback loop between educators and employers really tight? And I don't think it is. I mean, we've done some work at Pearson around this idea around lost in transition, where, you know, there's friction when somebody is going from from school to a career, or even from career to career. We've actually estimated it's about $1 trillion, I think, of US GDP that's lost just in that time that someone is in between those two steps. So I think that we could do a lot to really improve the feedback between what is happening in the classroom to what is happening in the workplace. And we think some of the best models to do that are actually to train on the job.
Yeah, and to Rosemary's point, like the building trades have some phenomenal numbers on the number of registered apprenticeships that have jobs now and that go through that process annually. I mean, the numbers are really impressive.
That's great. And I think that feedback loop is extremely important between all the stakeholders. Josh, I had one follow-up question for you. So how can data itself help policymakers better anticipate skill shifts to design smarter AI and workforce policies?
Yeah, so data is critical, and this administration and this Congress acknowledges that, and the previous administration did as well. You need to have real-time data on what's happening with the workforce, what AI specific skills are in demand, technical and literacy skills, and then what peripheral non-AI skills are in demand. Quick shout out for LinkedIn's Economic Graph and Research Institute. We believe this so much that we've stood up this Institute of Economists and Data Scientists that look at our data and provide to policymakers in the US and around the world real-time data of what's happening at a national level, a state level, and we can even zoom in further than that. But it's critical. Otherwise, policymakers are flying blind if they don't have a real-time understanding of what's going on in the labor market. And beyond LinkedIn, we need robust and accurate data at the federal and state level.
That's great. And I think that actually answered one of the questions we got from our audience, which is about how do we build that out? I could find it, but how do we create the data infrastructure which powers individual access aligned with the demand in an AI accelerated world of work? I can think about, you know, data being so valuable, but we need to identify what we need and who are the actors then to go collect it, to analyze it, share it, and build.
Yeah, and it's important also that it's democratized. So not just policymakers have this gated information. Like everybody needs to see it. Everybody needs to know in their specific job how it's changing in the sector they may be looking at, how it's changing, how their skills or adjacent skills fit into that. And then what skilling opportunities there are to improve.
Yeah. And I can think about, you know, that public data being especially important to, say, researchers, but it could also be incredibly important and valuable to an entrepreneur who has identified an issue, whether in government or outside of it, a societal need, and to be able to build a solution upon that as long as it's available and democratized.
Absolutely.
And so with that, you know, I'd like to start closing out and leave the audience with one particular takeaway, which is it seems that there is a clear and growing gap between student preparedness and labor market needs, one that's likely to grow with the continued rise of AI, automation, augmentation, and our training and skill policies having always kept pace with the labor market. So one question for you all is, Where do you see some of the biggest gaps here? And what do policymakers, educators, or industry leaders need to start closing some of those?
I guess I'll start real quick. So the survey that we stacked on upon our EGRI work for this report asked businesses, like, what are some impediments to integrating and scaling generative AI in your businesses? They said 57% of respondents said AI technical skills, huge barrier. 60% said AI literacy skills. So I think that that is certainly top of mind in this kind of place we're at right now with AI adoption. Is there's a gap between the demand and the supply, and addressing that and acknowledging it.
Great. Rosemary?
No, I completely agree with Josh and where he was going with that. I think, one of the things I would just sort of leave the audience with is I don't think there's enough emphasis happening at the federal level, especially around policy, about talking about closing this gap. There's a lot of talk about this program will fund this and we'll have money for this particular population to do this, but there's not a comprehensive strategy. And worse than that, there's not really talk about a comprehensive strategy. We've seen the administration put forward a couple of papers on this stuff, but I don't think we're actually hearing Congress really get behind thinking really big about what needs to happen around reskilling. So that's something I'm hopeful that more people will start to weigh in on.
Yeah, and we did get a question from the audience where they asked, when we're preparing secondary students, how does that preparation remain resilient with the constant demand changes? For example, if a student chooses to pursue post-secondary education, what majors or degrees do we then point them to? Acknowledging, a few years ago, computer science seemed to be the degree that guaranteed you a high-paying, secure job. And today, that might have changed a little bit. Tomorrow, that might be different as well.
Yeah, I don't know if somebody else wants to take that. I mean, I would just say that I think this is kind of to my point from before, which is there's a gap in between what is happening in the real world and what we're teaching, right? And so I think when we close that gap, I think things will get a lot better. And it happens with better data. It happens with better infrastructure. For sure, it happens with more alignment with industry, working on the job and learning on the job. And I also just think it goes back to something that I just fundamentally believe, which is you have to learn how to learn. It's not so much that computer science doesn't matter. Computer science still very much matters today, right? But it's also how do we take what we've learned in computer science and adapt that to maybe the latest technology that is happening. So it's sort of a fundamental shift in how we think about it. And I think a lot of folks still sort of say, oh, you go into this major and you'll be set for life. Well, the world has changed pretty dramatically. You don't learn something and then just expect that to be the skill set you have to take you through a career. It's an ongoing, iterative process.
Yeah, Rosemary's absolutely right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say that exactly the same thing. I could not possibly agree more. I think that in this area, I think the major change, just thinking about a student, entering college, for example, the message to that person needs to be to understand that they're entering a dynamic world where they're going to have to think about their skills as always evolving. So, I mean, computer science, just to use that example, I mean, computer scientists are going to continue to need to exist, if for no other reason than to develop better and better AI tools. You still need humans to actually create those tools. And to do many, many other things. Just the nature of that work will change. And that'll be true across a wide variety of disciplines. So it's not so much, I think, I think it makes sense to, and there are tools that do this. The BLS employment projections, for example, is just a publicly available, annually updated tool that provides insight into the type of occupations that are expected to grow or shrink over the next 10 years. So information like that, provides an important tool to kind of, if you're a student, to gauge, am I entering a field that has growing employment or shrinking employment? That's good information to have. But I think the more fundamental piece of information is just that attitude about thinking about your career as being a constantly evolving one where reskilling, upskilling are going to be part of it.
That's great. It reminds me, 2 years ago, I met a college student who was majoring in artificial intelligence. And part of that coursework was a combination of two different departments. It was computer science and also philosophy. So it just shows, how some of that can change over time and how you combine different fields because there's something new emerging that is very critical and important. How do we approach our relationships with emerging technology? How do we govern it? And how do we purpose it to the objectives that we have at hand? As well as understand, what are the unknown unknowns of where value can be created in the future as well. So maybe one last question that we just got from the audience. Do we anticipate that there will be fewer high-skilled jobs when AI hits full force?
I would say, that's high skilled is a bit of a vague definition. But I would say a part that we haven't talked about yet, and a part that's sort of it's constantly true with any period of technological change, is that going into it, the kind of fear is that there's going to be job destruction and there's no thought about job creation. And the truth is that periods of technological change are always associated with both job destruction and job creation. And in fact, the creation part tends to dominate. So a technology comes along, usually more jobs are actually created, more new things are needed than are actually lost. And I should say the other thing is that a lot of jobs are, of course, transformed as well. So I would say I would not go to that prediction. We do live in a highly dynamic environment that's hard to predict. But I would not make that prediction that high-skilled jobs are going to be going away or that they're going to be less important. I do think that the nature of those jobs is going to change.
Yeah, the demand for competence and high amounts of skill that you bring to your job the long pattern has been on the ascendancy, and I don't see any reason why that would change.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank you all, Rosemary, Justin, Josh, for such a thoughtful and engaging conversation. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for also joining us. And now I just want to turn it back to Cheryl to help close us out. So over to you, Cheryl.
Thanks so much, John, and appreciate your facilitating that discussion. And I just want to join in thanking Justin and Rosemary and Josh for being here with us today. Obviously AI is here to stay and it's changing how we learn and work. I think it's our job now to guide that change responsibly and by helping people really build both the foundational and technical skills, as was talked about, that they're going to need to thrive, and by ensuring that educators, employers, and policymakers all work together to align learning pathways with the skills that the labor market demands. As all of our panelists discussed, that pace of change really requires our systems to be nimble. That we have that feedback loop that allows education and training providers to adjust to the needs of the labor market, allows policymakers to make better investment decisions about programs, and hopefully allows workers and learners to benefit from better information about skills that are needed and the pathways to get there. And of course, data is so critical, as was mentioned as well. Real-time data direct from employers, building that data infrastructure might be the most important that the royal we can do. At the top of this event, if you were here for the very beginning, you heard in the opening video from our co-chairs of the Commission on the American Workforce. And good news is that commission is considering all of these issues and thoughtfully debating and is going to put forth a strategy and a set of recommendations that I hope will address some of these things. And so encourage everyone to stay tuned for updates from our commission as they prepare to release recommendations in Q1 of 2026, and hope that you'll join us for that in-person event here in Washington, D.C. on March 11th. And finally, please join us for the very last installment of this series next month on December 2nd, we'll talk about workforce Pell, another very important issue that was raised, I think, by Rosemary today ahead of the start of negotiated rulemaking out of the Department of Ed. And we'll have some Key Hill staffers, we'll have some folks from the post-secondary education and workforce community to kind of talk about what sort of key questions still need to be answered and issues need to be addressed through negotiated rulemaking so that we ensure this really important enhancement of Pell works the way I know everyone hopes and intends that it will. So please join us on December 2nd for that event. And thank you all again for joining us. And thank you, panelists. And we'll see you on December 2nd.